Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this CSS tutorial on colors. Now in this tutorial we're going to take a look at a few of the different ways we can specify color in CSS. Quite a basic concept, but a lot of people don't realize the scope of which you can define colors in CSS. So we'll be taking a look at some of the properties that allow us to define, or not the properties, but the values that allow us to define colors for different properties. So we can color pretty much anything in any HTML element with CSS, whether it be a background color, a text color, or border color, for example. But I'm just going to go ahead and go with a simple example. I'm going to create a content area, a div area, which is going to allow me to just pop some text in and style that using the color property. So wherever you can specify color, these usually would take effect, but we're just going to be using simple examples. So let's go ahead and create a content area, and then we'll get on with styling this. So I'm just going to create a div with an ID of container. And then I'm going to go ahead and place some text inside. So this is some text, something quite basic. Okay, so in our browser at the moment, our browser renders this text by default as black. So if I go ahead and inspect the element, when we give the element the property color, and then which will automatically color the text, by the way, we can look at background colors and things like that differently, but the property color is going to color our text, and that's the the context we're going to be using this in. You'll see that it'll appear here. Now Chrome Element Inspector will render any color that you specify. I'm not sure about RGB, but we'll check that out when we use the RGB value. It will render it as a text-based color, and we'll also be looking at text-based colors as well. So it might confuse you when you're inspecting things in Chrome in terms of colors. If it does have a textual representation for a color, it'll always show you that. But let's go ahead and start to color this up. So I've given this an ID of container, so I'll go ahead and select container. And let's give this the color property, and we can choose a color now. So some basic colors that you might be familiar with in HTML are hexadecimal colors, and we specify hexadecimal colors in CSS using a hash. So we can use hash and then the color code, the hexadecimal representation of the color, and then that will render the color for us. Now the only problem with this is that you can load up your favorite image editor, pick a color, and then go ahead and specify it in CSS. There's nothing wrong with that. However, you might run into trouble with people with extremely older browsers with web-safe colors, especially if you're specifying a large area of color with a non-web-safe color. Nowadays, it's not something we need to really worry about too much, but it is still something that should be kept in mind as much as possible. Obviously, if you're using something that's not web safe and it absolutely has to be, then that's fine. Anyway, to specify hexadecimal color, you literally give the hexadecimal value. So if you're using an image editor, go in and select an image color and see how this is represented. For example, if I wanted to display black, I could use 00000. That represents black in hexadecimal. Same with FFF as white. Now there are other color combinations like ED, for example, F0. If you're specifying something like black with the 6 digits here, we can actually shorten this. So if the digits are the same or the letters are the same, then you can go ahead and shorten that. So I've shortened this to 000. Same with FFF. It just makes it a lot easier. Also, it's kind of a thing that you should avoid using uppercase. It's probably always better to just use lowercase. Anyway, I've colored this FFF, which is white, so the text within should be rendered white, and therefore it's invisible. So if we go ahead and inspect this, there's no, it's literally just white. Let's go ahead and set this to, I don't know, ED. That's another hexadecimal color there. and it's slightly lighter, and you can see that the color has been, it's very hard to see, but you can see that the color has been specified here. Again, we can say something like AAA, which is the shortened version of AAA, and that will, sort of be a bit more visible. And you can see here that it's rendered it slightly differently. It's done sort of like an uppercase version of it. I think if we were to do 6 of them in there, it renders it. Oops. AAA. It will render it as 3 of these. So it tends to give you, what it prefers through this element inspector. So don't be too thrown off by that. But as you can see, as I'm hovering over it, it shows what we've actually specified in our style sheet. Okay, so anyway, that's hex-based colors. We're going to look at 3 more quite briefly, and we've got we've got RGB, and RGB is the red, green, blue color. Again, if you're using a fairly good image editor, you should have the RGB value of the color that you've chosen shown to you. So when you use a color picker, you should get this value. I don't know many RGB colors to hand. I'm not great with knowing RGB colors. I tend to stick to hex. However, if I was to pick RGB value of 000, that would obviously be black. So when we go ahead and refresh here, we've just got black text. You can see that Chrome Element Inspector has called this black for us. The same with white, would be 255, 255, 255, and again that would render that white. But really, what we're looking at here is just a different way to specify a color of something. So, RGB, hex, whatever you decide to use, then, that's there for you. Now, the slightly alternative to RGB is RGBA. Now, at the time of recording, currently lack of support in Internet Explorer, but support for all other major browsers. RGBA essentially just allows you to specify an RGB color as normal, but then also specify an alpha on the end, which is essentially what you would think of as opacity, or how transparent a color is. Now, the benefit to this is that you don't have to use opacity. You can actually specify a color to be slightly faded, for example. So if I was to choose 000 and then 0.5 for the alpha, what this will do is it will render it as a black color, but it will have it as half opacity, so it's half visible. Again, the benefit to this is if we had a container around this, for example, so we had a container around it that was blue, we can fade the text, but we don't actually have to fade the entire container. So it's useful to use RGB if you don't want to set an opacity on an entire element. Just as an example, if I wanted to say just set the opacity of this text and not the container, I would have to include another element to the markup to be able to do this. So for example, the container, if I was to say set the background color to this color here, what I would have to do is inside of here I'd have to say container span and then paste this in here in order to say opacity 0.5, for example. So I would have to use that to fade the color of the text. However, using color RGBA, we can eliminate the need for all of this excess markup and styling, and we can just specify to have the font color half opacity. So it means we can completely reduce our markup and completely reduce our styling. We get exactly the same effect using RGBA. Obviously, like I said at the time of recording, Internet Explorer support isn't great, so it's something you need to watch out for. Okay, so the last color specification we're going to look at is text-based colors. Now these are great because it's sort of like a set standard of colors that you can use. You know that they're going to be web safe because they're specified as textual colors in the browser. Things like slate gray, for example. If we were to refresh, that's got a nice, it's sort of like a bluey grey. It's very nice. So you can see here we've got a slate grey. What we can do is we can go ahead and we can, Google around and look up the hex color value for slate grey, and it will give it to us. I think it's ED. I can't remember. However, we can use color values like blue, for example, which is a horrible blue color. There's plenty of these colors, but you can just go ahead and look them up. I'm not going to list them out, but that's another way to specify color. So we've got loads of ways to specify colors. There's not really a correct way to do it. Commonly used is hexadecimal, and again, if you want to use that cool fading trick and fade out just the text of something and nothing else, then use RGBA. But watch out for that Internet Explorer support. So that's colors in CSS.